It was the big day, the science fair they'd been working toward for weeks. The mother and her daughter arrived at the venue buzzing with excitement, holding tightly to the project they'd poured their hearts into. The little girl had stayed up late for nights, carefully building and painting, testing her ideas and dreaming about showing them to others. She was proud. Her eyes sparkled with hope and a bit of nervous energy as they walked in, ready to share what she'd created. But the moment they stepped into the large, echoing hall, that excitement started to shift. Around them were rows of tall, polished displays with flashing lights, moving parts, and even digital screens. Some kids wore matching t-shirts, speaking confidently as if they'd rehearsed a dozen times. Parents clustered around their children's booths, adjusting things and whispering advice. The daughter's eyes widened as she looked at her own modest project. Simple, handmade, honest. Her grip on the project tightened just a little. She didn't say anything, but her smile faded. She glanced around and then down at her display. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think mine looks too small?" The mother bent down and smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's face. "It's perfect," she said, though inside her heart twinged with worry. She could see the shift in her daughter's posture, shoulders slightly slumped, her steps slower now. It wasn't that her project had changed, but the atmosphere had. The room buzzed with energy, but it wasn't welcoming. It felt like a competition, not just of science, but of who belonged. And suddenly, her daughter wasn't so sure if she did. As they walked past rows of flashing boards and perfectly polished presentations, that early excitement gave way to something else, a quiet, creeping anxiety. The daughter stood by her project, trying to smile, but the glow was gone from her face. The mother stayed close, silently wishing she could protect her little girl from the feeling that she was already falling behind before it even began. What started as a dream-filled morning now felt like a mountain they weren't prepared to climb. They found their assigned table near the back corner of the room. As they began setting up the project, the mother helped straighten the board while the daughter carefully arranged her models and notes. She kept glancing at the displays around her, trying to stay confident, but her hands moved a little slower now. On one side, a group of kids were laughing loudly, huddled together with their parents, glancing over and then turning away with barely hidden smirks. One of the boys nudged another, whispered something, and they both chuckled while looking directly at her. The mother noticed, her chest tightening, but she stayed quiet, pretending not to see. Whispers started floating through the air like tiny cuts. Some parents leaned into their kids, saying things too quietly to hear, but their tone and eyes said enough. A few students gave quick glances at her daughter's table and then returned to their groups, sharing small laughs that felt louder than they were. The daughter stood still for a moment, her smile flickering like a candle in the wind. She looked up at her mom, trying to act like it didn't matter, but the hurt was settling in. It wasn't open cruelty. No one said anything directly to her, but it was in the way others avoided her table, how their eyes slid past her like she wasn't even there. It was in the way the other kids formed tight circles, talking and laughing together, never looking her way or inviting her in. It was in the way one mom raised her eyebrows as she passed by their project, clearly unimpressed, before leaning in to praise her own child's work louder than necessary. The daughter took a tiny step back from her project, hands folded in front of her, not quite sure what to do with herself. The room buzzed with voices and excitement, but around her, there was a bubble of silence. The mother bent down and whispered, "You're doing amazing," but her daughter didn't answer. Her eyes were stuck on the kids in the center of the room, laughing like they belonged. She felt it deeply now, not just nervous, but out of place. The fair hadn't even started yet, but somehow it already felt like she was losing. As the science fair officially began and students started presenting their projects, the room filled with chatter and excitement. Judges walked around with clipboards, and parents hovered nearby, snapping photos. The daughter stood by her table, quietly waiting her turn, nervously rehearsing what she would say. When a small group of students approached her project, she looked up with a hopeful smile, thinking maybe they were interested. But instead of asking questions or showing curiosity, they leaned in and started whispering and laughing. One of the boys pointed at her handmade model and said loudly enough for others to hear, "That looks like something a second grader made." Another girl giggled and added, "It's so basic. Did you just Google it last night?" Their voices cut through the air like sharp knives. A few more kids nearby glanced over, some smiling awkwardly, others pretending not to notice. The daughter's smile faded, her hands clenched tightly behind her back. She tried to respond, but her voice wouldn't come out. The mother saw it happen from a few feet away. Her heart ached, but she let her daughter handle it, thinking maybe it would pass. But then, as the daughter stepped away for just a moment to speak with a judge, the same group returned. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, one boy reached over and tilted one of her display pieces, just enough to make it fall. A small part broke off, landing on the table with a soft thud. They quickly walked away, trying to act casual, barely containing their laughter. When the daughter returned and saw her project damaged, her face went pale. She gently picked up the broken piece and stared at it, her lips trembling. "Mom, someone messed with it," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Her mother rushed over, kneeling beside her, trying to calm her down, but the tears had already started. All the hard work, the late nights, the excitement, it now felt ruined. The daughter turned her face away, ashamed, even though she'd done nothing wrong. "I don't want to do this anymore," she muttered, voice shaking, and in that moment, all she wanted was to disappear. The mother stood beside her daughter, watching the tears quietly roll down her cheeks. Her daughter tried to wipe them away quickly, hoping no one would see, but it was too late. The damage was done, not just to the project, but to her spirit. The mother's heart twisted. Every instinct inside her screamed to step in, to march over to the kids who had laughed and tampered with the project, to call out the injustice in front of everyone. But she paused. Would that help her daughter, or only make it worse? Would it just draw more eyes, more whispers, more shame? Her fists clenched by her sides. She looked around the room, at the smiling parents who hadn't seen or had chosen not to see, at the kids who went on chatting like nothing had happened. A storm brewed inside her, but she swallowed it. Right now, her daughter needed calm, not chaos. She crouched down to eye level, gently placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I know this hurts," she said softly, voice steady but filled with emotion. "But this doesn't define you. You're brilliant. You are brave, and you worked so hard. That still matters." The daughter didn't speak. She just looked at her broken project, lips pressed tightly together, her confidence crumbling in front of her mother's eyes. The mother fought the tears stinging behind her own. She had watched her child light up while building that project, dreaming out loud about sharing it with the world. And now here she was, small, silent, and crushed under the weight of cruelty. "I'm proud of you," the mother continued, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Not just for this project, but for showing up, for standing here when it's hard. That takes strength." Her words were quiet but strong, like a shield trying to wrap around her daughter's wounded heart. She could see her daughter trying to hold on, trying not to break completely, and that was enough for now. The mother knew she couldn't erase the pain, but maybe, just maybe, her voice could soften it. Maybe her presence could keep her daughter from walking away from more than just the science fair. So she stayed close, holding the pieces of the project and of her daughter together the best she could. As the afternoon stretched on, the energy in the hall began to shift. Some kids were still showing off their projects. Others looked bored or tired. The mother and daughter stayed quietly near their booth, trying not to draw attention. Just when the daughter looked like she might ask to go home, the doors at the back of the hall opened, and in walked a man no one seemed to recognize. He was dressed neatly, sharp suit, clean shoes, carrying a leather notebook in one hand. He didn't look like a parent or a teacher. He looked important, but not flashy, calm but curious. Heads turned almost immediately. Who was he? A few teachers exchanged glances. Some parents whispered to each other. The man moved slowly, thoughtfully, walking from table to table with purpose. He wasn't smiling politely like the other judges. He was looking carefully, asking quiet questions, and jotting notes in his book. Not in a showy way, more like he was really, truly interested. The daughter noticed him too. She stood a little straighter, watching as he moved closer and closer to her row. "Mom, who do you think he is?" she whispered. Her mom shrugged slightly, but her eyes followed him just the same. The room, which had felt loud and judgmental before, suddenly grew quieter. There was something about his presence that made people stop what they were doing and just watch. As he approached their table, the same group of kids who had laughed at her project earlier suddenly went quiet. They watched him like he was someone who mattered, and somehow, he did. The man paused in front of a few booths, nodding, taking notes, asking a question or two. Then he stopped at the daughter's project. He said nothing at first. He just observed, carefully, slowly. His eyes moved over every piece, every detail she had put together with so much care. The daughter looked up at him, unsure, nervous. And then he smiled just a little and opened his notebook again. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Who is he? I think he's from the university. No, I heard he's with a big foundation. No one knew for sure. But one thing was clear. He wasn't just anybody. And now he was standing at her table. The man stood quietly in front of the daughter's booth, his eyes moving slowly across every part of her project. He didn't rush. He didn't glance and walk away like others had. He leaned in slightly, studying the details like they mattered. The daughter stood still, unsure what to say. Then in a calm and kind voice, he asked, "Did you build all of this yourself?" She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, I did," she replied softly. He smiled more this time. "Can you explain it to me?" Her eyes widened. No one had really asked her that all day. She hesitated at first, then began speaking, quietly at first, explaining how she came up with the idea, how she tested it, what the results meant. As she talked, the stranger nodded along, asking questions. Not the kind that test you, but the kind that make you feel like your answers matter. With each question, she grew a little more confident. Her voice got stronger, her eyes lit up. The man was listening, really listening, not pretending, not just being polite. He even scribbled something in his notebook, nodding again, as if what she'd said impressed him. People began to notice. A small crowd formed nearby. The same kids who had laughed at her earlier now stood silent, watching this man show more interest in her project than anyone else in the room. A few parents leaned in, whispering to each other, clearly wondering who he was and why he had stopped there. The mother watched from the side, stunned. Her daughter, who just minutes ago had looked like she wanted to disappear, was now standing tall, explaining her work to someone who truly saw her. The stranger asked one last question, smiled again, and said, "This is really clever. You should be proud." And just like that, the whispers changed. The mockers weren't laughing anymore. They were curious, confused, even a little nervous, because now the girl they had dismissed was the one being noticed, and not by just anyone, but by someone important. The daughter looked up at her mom with a tiny, hopeful smile returning to her face. For the first time that day, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. After spending time at several booths and taking careful notes, the well-dressed man eventually made his way toward the front of the hall, where a microphone and small stage had been set up for closing remarks. The room slowly quieted as people noticed him stepping up. Teachers stood straighter, students stopped fidgeting, and parents leaned in with curiosity. The air was thick with whispers and questions. Who was he, and why did he seem so important? The man tapped the microphone gently, and his voice came through the speakers, calm and confident. "Good afternoon, everyone, Arisham," he began. "My name is Dr. Nathan Hale. I'm a scientist and inventor, and I work with a foundation that supports young thinkers who are building the future." A quiet gasp ran through the crowd. Some of the teachers nodded slowly, finally recognizing the name. The students, especially the ones who had been bragging earlier, looked at each other in surprise. Dr. Hale continued, his voice warm. "I've had the pleasure of visiting many science fairs across the country, and I always look for something that stands out. Not because it's the biggest or the flashiest, but because it shows heart, creativity, and problem solving." He paused and scanned the crowd. "And today, one project caught my attention in a very special way." He turned slightly and pointed toward the corner of the room, where the girl and her mother stood frozen, barely breathing. "This project," he said, "was built with clear thought, care, and a unique idea that could really help people if developed further. It wasn't surrounded by lights or expensive tools, but it showed real science, real potential." People turned their heads, following his gesture. The room went still. Some of the very kids who had mocked her earlier now stared in disbelief. Dr. Hale smiled and added, "It reminded me of why I became a scientist in the first place." The daughter's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness this time, but from something else. Shock, joy, pride. Her mother put a hand over her heart, barely believing what she was hearing. This wasn't just recognition, it was redemption. The girl who had been laughed at just hours ago was now being lifted up for the whole room to see. Skolni middle. Smarsur no grumps. Smars different. Snalaus nuts nuts. Hurler or the file that was the glowing. The show with the nimmer bia. Feel up sitting the climber or lumber. Souring a lipsery. And the zor for the sorg. Or nothing else all with fungus lab. All hot soft good look at in last. No, we're right so much healing off. Sir, eating it. Snare, we from a surf. I corpse all of a beer when it. More with life sag. My work with our through your meal in the surf on it. Near Indian is now, since now I'm past the must sing her weebly. Her must sit makes now, sir, evening I won't shine, and that's no special axle for your fault. Gilda. Does he fighting it all? Well, of name else that I look in the half work so in the cheery. Snails in the baron medium weaking it when I get the guys gets that. The shaft making it in the shake the paddle or warrior rush it up. For the year in what on so gets not free. Doing this Nikolai her god. Do everything the dock there. And doubts out. Gosh, this nail bread. We sit and do it that. Yeah, this net. Guys, not for having a sword, but they'll carry skull net. No more soft. And the shoe soy roof skull net and Mulbar was his suit. He'll never fritzing it through and do it yet. So we can't be now. I'm yes, I'll come up. And see how I want to know we're back. Well, I'm so nice to the way gun it. Go once and I got the leak. Boy, her nodding for we're back and I'm with that. The daughter stood there holding the envelope, her hands still shaking a little, but something inside her had shifted. The fear and doubt that had weighed her down earlier were gone, replaced by something new, something stronger. She looked out at the crowd, all eyes now on her, not with judgment but with admiration. The same room that once made her feel small now seemed to lift her up. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and smiled, with gentle encouragement from Dr. Hale. She stepped toward the microphone. At first she hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she began, her eyes searching the crowd and then landing on her mother. "I didn't think anyone would see value in my project, but I believed in it, because I believe science can help people." The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. She spoke more confidently now. "I love solving problems. I love asking questions. And even though today started off really hard, I'm grateful I stayed, because now I know that one moment, one kind person, can change everything." A quiet cheer rose from the back. Then more claps followed. Kids who had once snickered now nodded with respect. Even parents leaned in, smiling, proud to witness something so genuine. Teachers exchanged glances, touched by her honesty and courage. Her mom wiped away a tear, heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just her daughter reclaiming her moment. It was her growing right in front of everyone's eyes. The once timid girl was now a young scientist, with her head held high and a voice that mattered. Dr. Hale smiled, clearly impressed. He placed a hand on her shoulder as if to say, "You've got this." And she did, because now she believed in herself more than ever. That spark of passion that had dimmed earlier in the day had turned into a fire, a quiet, steady fire that would carry her forward. As the applause filled the hall once again, it wasn't just for her project, it was for her strength, her resilience, her spirit. And somewhere in that room, another quiet child might have watched her and thought, "If she can do it, maybe I can too." As the crowd slowly began to clear and the lights in the hall dimmed, the mother stood beside her daughter, still trying to take it all in. Hours ago, they had walked into the science fair with hope, only to be met with judgment, cruelty, and heartbreak. She had watched her daughter's spirit nearly break under the weight of other people's unkindness. And now she was watching that same little girl shine brighter than she ever had before. Her eyes welled up as she thought about everything that had happened. The whispers, the giggles, the damage to the project. Each moment had felt like a punch to the heart. She had wanted to scream, to fight back, to protect her daughter from the ugliness. But she had stayed quiet, hoping to not make things worse. Still, a part of her had wondered, had she done enough? Then that stranger walked in, that one man who hadn't laughed or judged or walked past. Instead, he looked, he listened, and he saw something beautiful in her daughter's work, in her daughter's heart, and that changed everything. The mother realized how powerful one voice can be, one act of kindness, one moment of recognition. It was more than just a scholarship or applause. It was a reminder that her daughter mattered, that she was smart, creative, and worthy of being seen. She looked at her daughter now, eyes shining, cheeks flushed with joy, holding tightly onto that envelope like it was a piece of her future. This moment would stay with her forever. Not just the award, but the lesson that no matter how loud the bullies are, kindness will always speak louder if you let it. The mother gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Her daughter looked up with a smile that said everything. "Thanks for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As they walked toward the exit, the mother glanced back one last time at the hall. She knew this wasn't just a science fair anymore. It was the day her daughter learned that even in the face of cruelty, she could rise. And it was the day she learned that love, support, and the right encouragement can truly change a life.